The next day he summoned the assembly and told them what he proposed to do, and asked them for a well-built ship and 20 rowers to man her. But he got no answer except jeers and taunts. Let him sit at home and get his news there, the suitors bade him. They would see to it that he went on no voyage. With mocking laughter they swaggered off to Odysseus's palace. Telemachus, in despair, went far away along the seashore, and as he walked, he prayed to Athena. She heard him and came. She had put on the appearance of Mentor, whom of all the Ithacans Odysseus had most trusted, and she spoke good words of comfort and courage to him. She promised him that a fast ship should be made ready for him, and that she herself would sail with him. Telemachus, of course, had no idea except that it was Mentor himself speaking to him, but with this help he was ready to defy the suitors, and he hurried home to get all ready for the voyage. He waited prudently until night to leave. Then, when all in the house were asleep, he went down to the ship where Mentor, Athena, was waiting, embarked, and put out to sea toward Pylos, old Nestor's home. They found him and his sons on the shore, offering a sacrifice to Poseidon. Nestor made them heartily welcome, but about the object of their coming he would give them little help. He knew nothing of Odysseus. They had not left Troy together, and no word of him had reached Nestor since. In his opinion, the man most likely to have news would be Menelaus, who had voyaged all the way to Egypt before coming home. If Telemachus wished, he would send him to Sparta in a chariot with one of his sons who knew the way, which would be much quicker than by sea. Telemachus accepted gratefully, and leaving Mentor in charge of the ship, he started the next day for Menelaus's palace with Nestor's son. They drew rein in Sparta before the lordly dwelling, a house far more splendid than either young man had ever seen. A princely welcome awaited them. The housemaidens led them to the bath place, where they bathed them in silver bathtubs and rubbed them with sweet-smelling oil. Then they wrapped them in warm purple mantles for fine tunics and conducted them to the banquet hall. A servant hastened to them with water in a golden ewer, which she poured over their fingers into a silver bowl. A shining table was set beside them and covered with rich food in profusion, and a golden goblet full of wine was placed for each. Can't help but think that that's possibly a ritual thing going on. If not a initiation of some sort. Menelaus gave them a courteous greeting and bade them eat their fill. Young men were happy, but a little abashed by all the magnificence. Telemachus whispered to his friends, very softly, for fear someone might hear. Zeus's hall at Olympus must be like this. It takes my breath away. But a moment later, he'd forgotten his shyness, for Menelaus began to speak of Odysseus, of his greatness and his long sorrows. As the young man listened, tears gathered in his eyes, and he held his cloak before his face to hide his agitation. But Menelaus had remarked it, and he guessed who he must be. Just then, however, came an interruption which distracted the thoughts of every man there. Helen, the beautiful, came down from her fragrant chamber, attended by her women, one carrying her chair, another a soft carpet for her, and a third her silver work basket filled with violet wool. She recognized Telemachus instantly from his likeness to his father, and she called him by name. Nestor's son answered and said that she was right. His friend was Odysseus' son, and he had come to them for help and advice. Then Telemachus spoke and told them of the wretchedness at home from which only his father's return could deliver them, and asked Menelaus if he could give him any news about him, whether good or bad. It is a long story, answered Menelaus, but I did learn something about him, and in a very strange way. It was in Egypt. I was weather-bound for many days on an island there called Pharos. Our provisions were giving out, and I was in despair when a female entity of the sea had pity on me. She let me know that her father was the sea entity Proteus, could tell me how to leave the hateful island and get safely home if only I could make him do so. For that I must manage to catch him and hold him until I learned from him what I wanted. The plan she made was an excellent one. Each day, Proteus came up from the sea with a number of seals and lay down with them on the sand, always in the same place, where I dug 4 holes, in which I and 3 of my men hid, each under a sealskin the female entity gave us. When the old entity lay down not far from me, it was no task at all for us to spring up out of our holes and seize him. But to hold him, that was another matter. He had the power of changing his shape at will, and there in our hands he became a lion and a dragon and many other animals, finally even a high-branched tree, but we held him firmly throughout, and at last he gave in and told me all I wished to know. Of your father, he said, that he was on an island, pining away from homesickness, kept there by a nymph, Calypso. Except for that, I know nothing of him since we left Troy 10 years ago. When he finished speaking, silence fell upon him and the company. They all thought of Troy and what had happened there since, and they wept, Telemachus for his father, Nestor's son for his brother, swift-footed Antilochus, dead before the walls of Troy, Menelaus for many a brave comrade fallen on the Trojan plain, and Helen, but who could say for whom Helen's tears fell? Was she thinking of Paris as she sat in her husband's splendid hall? That night, the young men in Sparta, Helen ordered her housemaidens to arrange beds for them in the entry porch, soft and warm, with thick purple blankets covered by smoothly woven rugs, and on top of all, woolen cloaks. A servant, torch in hand, showed them out, and they slept there in comfort until the dawn appeared. Meantime, Hermes had gone to carry Zeus's command to Calypso. He laced to his feet the sandals of imperishable gold, which bore him swift as a breath of air over the sea and earth. He took his wand, with which he could charm men's eyes to slumber, and springing into the air, he flew down to sea level. Skimming the wave crests, he reached at last the lovely island which had become for Odysseus a hateful prison. He found the nymph that was considered to be divine alone, and at this time they weren't dividing and saying nymphs and are undines and salamanders and gnomes and sliffs, and I don't think they were really doing this at this time. Odysseus, as usual, was on the sandy shore letting his salt tears flow while he gazed at the empty sea. Calypso took Zeus's orders in very ill part. She had saved the man's life, she said, when his ship was wrecked near the island, and cared for him ever since. Of course, everyone must give in to Zeus, but it was very unfair. And how was she to manage the voyage back? She had no ships and crews at command, but Hermes felt this was not his affair. Just take care not to make Zeus angry, he said, and went gaily off. Calypso, joyously off. Calypso gloomily set about the necessary preparations. She told Odysseus, who was at first inclined to think it all a trick on her part to do something detestable to him, drown him, very likely, but she finally convinced him she would help him build a splendidly strong raft. She promised him and sent him away on it, equipped with everything necessary. Never did any man do work more joyfully than Odysseus made his raft. 20 great trees furnished the wood, all very dry, so they would float high. On the raft Calypso put food and drink in abundance, and even a sack of the dainties Odysseus specially liked. The 5th morning after Hermes' visit found Odysseus putting out to sea before a fair wind over quiet waters. 17 days he journeyed without change of weather, always steering, never letting sleep close his eyes. On the 18th day, a cloudy mountain top arose up across the sea. He believed that he was saved. At that very moment, however, Poseidon, on his way back from Ethiopia, caught sight of him. He knew at once what the entities had done, but he muttered to himself, I think I can give him yet a long journey into sorrow before he reaches land. With that he summoned all the violent winds and let them loose. Blind sea and land with storm clouds, the east wind fought with the south, and the ill-blowing west with the north, and the waves rose up mightily. Odysseus saw death before him. Oh, happy the men who fell gloriously on the plain of Troy, he thought. For me to die thus ignobly, it seemed indeed that he could not escape. The raft was tossed as a dry thistle goes rolling over a field in autumn days, but a kindly female entity was at hand. Ino of the slim ankles, who had once been a Theban priestess. She pitied him, and, rising lightly from the water like a seagull, she told him his one chance was to abandon the raft and swim to shore. She gave him her veil, which would keep him from harm as long as he was in the sea. Then she disappeared beneath the billows. So, among the Thebans, does that mean the delicate features were particularly prized? Odysseus had no choice but to follow her advice. Poseidon sent a wave of waves to him, a terror of the sea. Well, delicate features for the female. It tore the logs of the raft apart. As a great wind scatters a heap of dried chaff, it flung Odysseus into the wild waters. But if he had only known it, bad as things seemed, the worst was over. Poseidon felt satisfied and went off contentedly to plan some other storm somewhere. And Athena, left free to act, calmed the waves. Even so, Odysseus had to swim for 2 days and nights before he reached land and could find a safe landing place. He came out of the surf exhausted and starving and naked. It was evening. Not a house, not a living creature was to be seen, but Odysseus was not only a hero, he was a man of great resourcefulness. He found a place where a few trees grew so thick and close to the ground no moisture could penetrate them. Beneath were heaps of dry leaves, enough to cover many men. He scooped out a hollow, and lying down, piled the leaves over him like a thick coverlet. Then, warm and still at last, with the sweet land odors blowing to him, he slept in peace. He had, of course, no idea where he was, but Athena had arranged matters well for him. The country belonged to the Phaeacians, a people that were splendid sailors and kind. Their king, Alkinoos, was a good and sensible man who knew that his wife, Greta, was a great deal wiser than he and always let her decide anything important for him. They had a fair daughter, yet unmarried. Nausicaa, for so the girl was called, never imagined the next morning when she was to play the part of a rescuer of a hero. When she woke up, she thought only about doing the family washing. She was a princess indeed, but in those days high-born ladies were expected to be useful, and the household linen was in Nausicaa's charge. Washing clothes was, then, a very agreeable occupation. She had the servants make ready an easy-running mule cart and pack it with soiled clothes. Her mother filled a box for her with all sorts of good things to eat and drink. She gave her, too, a golden flask of limpid olive oil to use it if she and her maids went bathing. Then they started, Nausicaa driving. They were bound for the very place where Odysseus had landed. A lovely river flowed into the sea, there which had excellent washing pools with an abundance of clear bubbling water. What the girls did was to lay the clothes in the water and dance on them until all the dirt was worked out. The pools were cool and shadowy. It was very pleasant work. Afterwards, they stretched the linen smooth to dry on the shore where the sea had washed it clean. Then they could take their ease. They bathed and anointed themselves with sleek oil and had their lunch and amused themselves with a ball which they threw to one another, dancing all the while. But at last the setting sun warmed them. The delightful day was over. They gathered up the linen, yoked in the mules, and were about to start home when they saw a wild-looking naked man suddenly step out of the bushes. Odysseus had been awakened by the girls' voices. By girls, they mean young women, right? Call people boy and girl until they're 30 nowadays. In terror, they ran away, all except Nausicaa. She faced him fearlessly, and he spoke to her as persuasively as his eloquent tongue could. "I am a suppliant at your knees, O queen," he said, "but whether you are mortal or divine, I cannot tell. Never anywhere have I set eyes on such a one. I wonder as I look at you. Be gracious to your suppliant, a shipwrecked man, friendless and helpless, without a rag to cover him." Nausicaa answered him kindly. She told him where he was, and that the people of the country were kind to luckless wanderers. The king, her father, would receive him with all courteous hospitality. She summoned to the frightful maids and bade them give the stranger the oil so that he could cleanse himself and find for him a mantle and a tunic. There are oils that help clean, and in regard to some substances, oil helps remove it. They waited while he bathed and dressed, and then all set forth for the city. Both they reached Nausicaa's home. However, that discreet maiden directed Odysseus to fall back and let her and the girls go on alone. People's tongues are so ill-natured, she said. If they saw a handsome man like you with me, they would be hinting at all sorts of things, and you can easily find my father's house. It is so much the more splendid. Enter boldly and go straight to my mother, who will be spinning at the hearth. What my mother says, my father will do. Now, less ceremony, right? But certainly, we recognize the people by the ones that oil up and all that, and come to us afresh. Odysseus, are at least the ones that are approved by that class, because obviously oils are not cheap to come by. I mean, they're cheaper to come by now, but, well, some of them are not as cheap to come by, but it's definitely not something a poor person can afford to do all the time. Odysseus agreed at once. He admired her good sense, and he followed her directions exactly. Entering the house, he strode through the hall to the hearth and sank down before the queen. Clasping her knees and praying for her help, the king quickly raised him and bade him sit at the table and take his fill of food and drink without fear. Whoever he was, and wherever his home, he could rest assured that they would arrange to send him there in one of their ships. It was now the time for sleep, but in the morning he could tell them his name and how he had made his way to them. So they slept through the night, Odysseus blissfully, on a couch, soft and warm, as he had not known since he left Calypso's isle. The next day, in the presence of all the Phaeacian chiefs, he told the story of his 10 years' wandering. He began with the departure from Troy and the storm that struck the fleet. He and his ships were driven across the sea for 9 days. On the 10th, they made the land of the Lotus Eaters and put it there. But weary though they were and in need of the refreshment, they were forced to leave quickly. The inhabitants met them with kindness and gave them their flour food to eat. But those who tasted it, only a few, fortunately, lost their longing for home. Now, flour with an F, not the, flour has an F, but, with a W, not the U. They wanted only to dwell in the lotus land and let the memory of all that had been fade from their minds. Odysseus had to drag them on shipboard and chain them there. They wept, so great was their desire to stay, tasting forever the honey-sweet flowers. Oh, were they adding honeysuckle to their salad or something? Or I'm sure there's other flowers. I just don't remember the name of any. Their next adventure was with the Cyclops Polyphemus, a full account of which is given in Part 1, Chapter 4. They lost a number of their comrades at his hands, and what was even worse, made Poseidon, who was Polyphemus's father, so angry that he swore Odysseus should reach his own country again, only after long misery and when he had lost all his men. For these 10 years his anger had followed him over the sea. From the Cyclops' island they came to the country of the winds, ruled over by King Achelous. Zeus had made him keeper of the winds, to still them or arouse them at his will. Achelous received them hospitably, and when they gave Odysseus, as a parting gift, a leather sack into which he had put all the storm winds, it was so tightly fastened that not the very least puff of any wind that spells danger for a ship could leak out. In this excellent situation for sailors, Odysseus' crew managed to bring them all near to death. They thought the carefully stored bag was probably full of gold. At any rate, they wanted to see what was in it. They opened it with the result, of course, that all the winds rushed out at once and swept them away in a terrific tempest. Finally, after the days of danger, they saw land, but they had better have stayed on the stormy sea, for it was the country of the Lastygergons, a people of gigantic size, and cannibals too. These horrible folk destroyed all Odysseus' ships except the one he himself was in, which had not yet entered the harbor when the attack was made. One of the things about cannibals, though, is that cannibals tend not to, it tends to be like part of a funeral or war or something. It's not, they draw from lot and they pick somebody from the community. That may happen. And a lot of these societies are actually less violent than, like, my country's been in my life. At least that's what they think, based on the evidence. This was by far the worst disaster yet, and it was with despairing hearts that they put in at the next island they reached. Never would they have landed if they knew what lay before them. If they had known what lay before them. They had come to Achaia, the realm of Circe, a most beautiful and most dangerous witch. Every man who approached her, she turned into a beast. Only his reason remained as before. He knew what had happened to him. She enticed into her house the party Odysseus dispatched to spy out the land, and there she changed them into swine. She penned them in a sty and gave them acorns to eat. They ate them. They were swine, yet inside they were men, aware of their vile state, but completely in her power. Now, being turned into apes and swine and donkeys and all sorts of things, you don't have to interpret it as physical to realize the importance of the story, or to take the story as important. Luckily for Odysseus, one of the party had been too cautious to enter the house. He watched what happened and fled in horror back to the ship. The news drove any thought of caution out of Odysseus. He started off all alone. Not one of the crew would go with him to try to do something, bring some help to the men. On his way, Hermes met him. He seemed a young man of that age when youth looks its loveliest. He told Odysseus he knew an herb which could save him from Circe's deadly art. With it he could taste anything she gave him and suffer no harm. When he had drunken the cup she offered him, Hermes said he must threaten to run her through with his sword unless she freed his followers. Odysseus took the herb and went thankfully on his way. All turned out even better than Hermes had predicted. When Circe